Is it starting? Am I on? Showtime. Okay, so welcome to Office Hours today. I'm going to go over the rest of the text. So in your assignment, you should have had me going over that first paragraph of the stranger in the photo is me. Oh, look, I made a mistake. Let's see, fix that. Great. And so just based off of the first paragraph that we had already read in the other video was we talked about the author and the exigence of this text. So one thing that we want to talk about and think about is that memoir is memory, right? We talked about that on yesterday in the Nearpod lesson. And for those of you wondering how I'm grading Nearpod, I just want to do a quick announcement here. It is my first time using Nearpod. I know a lot of you struggled with highlighting and the text and all of that stuff. So I'm just going to go through and make sure that you've completed it, and I'm only grading the quiz portion at the end. And so I will be more clear with the directions on Nearpod as I get to know it a little bit better. But that was just my quick announcement about your grades. So let's continue going with The Stranger in the Photo Is Me. So in that first paragraph, I learned that the author is not someone who usually reflects a lot about their history, right? He says, particular diction here, to heck with yesterday, what are we going to do tomorrow? So that shows me that him as an individual is not someone who really focuses on the past, but where he uses this particular moment of diction, the accumulation of yesterdays and the possibility of shrinking tomorrows. Wow, beautiful words. Accumulation of yesterdays and the possibility of shrinking tomorrows. I see that he's starting to be more reflective about his life, and that has to do particularly with aging. And so when we're thinking about the exigence of this text, we're thinking about what's the spark that caused him to write. And that spark is directly his aging, right? As you get older, you want to be more reflective of like, what kind of life did I live? Okay, so I'm going to start by reading the second paragraph here. In looking at mine, I become aware that it is so recent in the stretch of a man's history that we have been able to stop time in a way and hold still for reflection. I underline this part because it's showing me the purpose, right? Maybe the purpose is that he wants to just stop and reflect. Vermeer is one of my favorite painters because of that sense of suspended time, with both clock and calendar held so wonderfully, so terribly still. I went ahead and highlighted Vermeer. That's a famous painter, as he said. He's making allusions to other things that have to do with time and the sense of suspended time. The people in the snapshots are all strangers. My parents were young, caught before I arrived, or as they were when I saw them as towering grown-ups. They seem so old then and so young now, and I am, to me, the strangest of all. There's a photograph of me on a tricycle before the duplex on Grand View Avenue in Wollaston I hardly remember. In another, I am dressed in a seersucker sailor suit when I was 5 and lived in a Cincinnati hotel. I cannot remember the suit, but even now, studying the snapshot, I am drunk on the memory of its peculiar odor, and time is erased. I'm going to highlight this moment because as the author is going through the different photographs, it seems like he is setting up each photograph as a portal in time, right? He looks at the photo, he looks at what he's wearing, and he's not just describing the photo, but he's remembering the experience. So the photographs themselves are like portals in time. And he uses vivid imagery and diction to describe these photographs. In the snapshots, I passed from chubby to skinny and unfortunately ended up a chub. Looking at the grown-ups in the snapshots, I should have known. In other snapshots, I am a cowboy, a pilot, Indian chief. I love to dress up and become what I was not, and suspect I still am aware of masks and costumes. I underline this because it stands out to me. And so in the last video, I had talked about when you read a memoir and you're really engaging with someone else's experience, you want to think of the things that stick out to you the most because that's going to be highlighting some sort of purpose or rhetorical choice that the author is making. When he says here, I suspect I'm still aware of masks and costumes, I almost see like a struggle within his own identity. Is he not happy with who he became? Does he feel like he's not living an authentic life? And so I'm just going to annotate that for myself and put struggle with identity. I'm not sure. Maybe that's part of the reflection, right? Maybe he needs to figure out who he really is. For now, I'm going to keep reading. It would be socially appropriate to report on this day that I contemplate all those who are gone, but the truth is that my eyes are drawn back to the pictures of my stranger self. And in the picture that haunts me the most is one not in costume, but in the uniform I proudly earned in World War II. I believe it was taken in England from the design of the barracks behind me. I have taken off the ugly steel-frame GI glasses, a touch of dishonesty for the girl who waited at home. So that's kind of funny because it goes into this idea of him wearing masks and costumes, is like this idea that his glasses weren't even real, and it's something that he kind of just wore and felt dishonest wearing because that was the picture he sent home. My overseas caps with its airborne insignia is tugged down over my right eye. My right shoulder in the jump jacket is lower because I have left my hand in my pocket in rakish disregard for the regulation that a soldier in war could never ever stick a hand in a pocket. The pockets are empty in the photograph. The pockets that are empty in the photograph will soon bulge with hand grenades, extra ammunition, food, and many of the gross condoms we were issued before a combat jump. This GI item was more a matter of industrial merchandising than soldierly dreaming, or frontline reality. The soldier smiles as if he knew his innocence and is both eager for its loss and nostalgic for those few years of naivety behind him. And so as he's describing this one particular picture of him in the GI costume, he again is using like very specific imagery and diction and showing things that he might be proud of, but also things that he's criticizing about himself. I also noticed that instead of saying me, he says the soldier. So I'm going to drop that because I think that's a really interesting choice. Instead of saying me, he says the soldier. Is he meaning to distance himself from the photo? And again, it goes up with that theme of the struggle with his identity. Is he not happy with who he is or who he was? And so maybe that's why he doesn't reflect on it in the first place. But that's really interesting because the title of the text is "The Stranger in the Photo is Me." And when he's describing it, sometimes he says, I have my hand in my pocket. This is my cap. But then here he shifts and he says the soldier. So that's really interesting. I try once more to enter the photograph and become what I was the day when autumn sunlight dappled the barracks wall. And I was so eager to experience the combat my father wanted so much for me. He had never made it to the trenches over there in his war. When that photograph was taken, my father still had dreams of merchandising glory, of a store with an awning that had read Murray and Son. I had not yet become the person who had to nod yes at MGH when my father asked if he had cancer, to make the decision against extraordinary means after his last heart attack. When this photo was taken, he had not yet grown old. His collars large, his step hesitant, his shoes unfinished. And so I have a rhetorical choice here. Do you guys remember what that is? Anyone on here? When this photo was taken. Exactly. Yep, it's anaphora. So I'm going to go ahead and add that comment. So obviously when we use anaphora, it's to bring in attention to a particular part. So the photo is not just reminding him of who he was as a soldier, it's also reminding him of like the family dynamics that were around that time when that picture existed or was taken, right? And he's using that to think about what was my life like in that moment in time. Mother was still alive, and her mother, who really raised me, had not died, as I was to learn in this letter I received at the front. The girl who wrote every day and for whom that photo was taken had not yet become my wife, and we had not yet been the first in our families to divorce 2 years later. I had not yet seen my first dead soldier, had not yet felt the earth underneath me become a trampoline as the shells of a rolling barrage marched through our position. Again, we have that repetition, had not yet, that he's using to kind of reflect on the things that happened to him after that. Right? That's done purposefully. I had no idea my life would become as wonderful or as terrible as it had been. I love this idea of juxtaposing, like, your life is always going to be wonderful and terrible at the same time. There's always going to be good and bad to balance that out. So he's kind of speaking on that human experience. That I would remarry, have 3 daughters, and outlive one. I could not imagine that I actually would be able to become a writer and eat, even overeat. I simply cannot recreate my snapshot innocence. I had not had an easy or happy childhood. I had done well at work but not at school. I was not Mr. Pollyanna, but life has been worse and far better than I could have imagined. Again, that repetition of that phrase, life had been far worse and far better than I could have imagined. It kind of speaks to this idea that, like, your life isn't going to be what you think it is. Sometimes it's going to be better, and then in other ways it's going to be worse. And that's just the experiences. We have to take the good with the bad. Over 60, we are fascinated by the mystery of our life. Why roads were taken and not taken, and our children encourage this as they develop a sense of family history. A daughter discovers a letter from the soldier in the photograph in England, and another written less than a year later on VE Day. She's surprised at how much I aged. I am not. I would not wish for a child or grandchild of mine to undergo the blood test of war my father so hoped I would face, as he had not. In photos taken not so many years later, I have a streak of white hair. It is probably genetic, but I imagine it is the shallow of a bullet that barely passed me by, and I find I cannot enter the snapshot of the smiling soldier who is still stranger to me, still innocent of the heroic harm man can deliver to man. In that last part, I feel like he's focusing on this idea of the war photo, and thinking about, like, that innocence, right? He said innocence multiple times in these last paragraphs. He also says it up here. I simply cannot recreate my snapshot innocence. And then here he says, I find I cannot enter this. Oh, no, what's happening? Sorry. Let me go back. I find I cannot enter the snapshot of the smiling soldier. So it talks particularly about, like, the heroic harm man can deliver to man. And so he's reflecting on this because something particularly changed his innocence, which is what in the text? If you guys are on. Yeah, particularly the war. So the war changed him. And so reflecting on this, he doesn't want other people to experience it. So it's kind of showing that, like, his own reflection is showing that, like, he doesn't want to have other people experience this hardship that changes them, but still it's good to reflect. And so this was written in the Boston Globe in 1991.